and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to Farage. I'm Mark Steyn, in for Nigel on this Monday night. Coming up, can a British subject get a fair trial in an American court? Are the French about to turn the charred Cathedral of Notre into Christendom's Disneyland? And will the all-powerful Omicron kill Father Christmas this year? Plus, Julian Assange's brother will be joining me, and I'll be talking pints with the irrepressible Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits, as in I'm Enery the Eighth I Am. Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter. There's a kind of hush all over the world tonight, and there will be, because you'll be agog at every word Peter utters, hanging on every syllable. And of course, the indispensable part of the show, your comments and questions. Shoot me your thoughts via email, gbviews@gbnewsuk, or tweet me at GBNews. All coming up on Farage after the news with Simon Pusey.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm Simon Pusey. These are your latest news headlines. COVID booster vaccinations are to be offered to all over 18s to help tackle the spread of the Omicron variant. The JCVI has also recommended that the time between a second and third dose be halved to 3 months, and for 12 to 15-year-olds to be offered second jabs. The new advice follows early evidence which suggests that high antibody levels may provide better protection against Omicron. Well, the Health Secretary has announced 2 additional cases of the new variant in England, taking the UK total to 11. Sajid Javid announced the mandatory wearing of face coverings in shops and on public transport from 4 a.m. tomorrow. He also confirmed that those returning from abroad would have to self-isolate until a negative PCR test has been issued.
We're learning more about this new variant all the time, but the latest indication is that it spreads very rapidly. It may impact the effectiveness of one of our major treatments for COVID-19, Ronapreve. And, as the Chief Medical Officer said this weekend, there's a reasonable chance that our current vaccines may be impacted.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has reshuffled parts of his shadow cabinet. Culture Secretary Jo Stevens will replace Neil Griffith as the shadow Welsh Secretary. Cat Smith said she's resigning as Shadow Secretary for Young People and returning to the backbenches. She also tweeted a letter warning of the damage caused by the failure to readmit former leader Jeremy Corbyn to the party. A teenager has been remanded in custody after appearing in court charged with the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Liverpool. Ava White was stabbed in the city centre last Thursday and died from what police described as catastrophic injuries. The 14-year-old boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was also charged with being in possession of a blade. The jury has been chosen in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell in New York. The British socialite has been accused of recruiting teenagers for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse for 10 years from 1994. She's been in the US jails since her arrest in July last year and denies any wrongdoing. Over 100,000 homes are still without power after Storm Arwen battered the UK. The Energy Networks Association said about 155,000 properties were still suffering from power cuts this afternoon. They said the destruction of electricity lines was the worst seen in Britain since 2005. And that's your news update. Let's get back to Farage.
Well, as you just heard there from Simon, the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the late and disgraced Robert Maxwell, has opened today in federal court in New York. She faces 8 decades in jail on sex trafficking and perjury charges. So if she's convicted, she won't be out until she's 139. Miss Maxwell was the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein, the paedophile billionaire. No one seems to know quite how the late Mr. Epstein made all that money, but he owned a private island and a private plane to fly him there, known as the Lolita Express. The flight manifests for the Lolita Express contain all kinds of interesting names. Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, former Senator George Mitchell. He was the American end of the Irish peace process a generation back. Oh, and William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States. Yet none of these powerful and influential figures are the subject of inquiries by either the FBI or the court eunuchs of the pathetic American media. Instead, the only people caught in the crosshairs are some English gal and some fella who's ninth in line to a distant foreign throne. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, whom most Americans couldn't have picked out of a police lineup until he started turning up in the tabloids. Gee, it's almost as if the US Department of Justice is using these 2 British subjects as some sort of distraction for all the American big shots they're giving a pass to. Now, I should say I have no use either for Miss Maxwell. I've never met a member of the Maxwell family I wasn't creeped out by, or for His Royal Highness, a buffoon who thinks he's a genius. But I am interested in due process and equality before the law, both of which are dying concepts in America's so-called justice system. Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, has filed multiple motions in which she asserts that for a year and a half of solitary confinement, her jailers have woken her up every couple of hours or even every 15 minutes to check that she hasn't killed herself. You'll recall that Mr. Epstein, the most high-value prisoner in the custody of the US Bureau of Prisons, quote-unquote, committed suicide while both his guards were sleeping and the security cameras were malfunctioning. He had been on so-called suicide watch, but they'd quietly taken him off suicide watch because they thought his suicidalness had all cleared up. So we'll never see him on the witness stand. As for Miss Maxwell, in a functioning judicial system, it might be thought prejudicial to sleep-deprive the accused before her trial and any testimony. Certainly, if you did it to the jihad lads at Guantanamo, you'd never hear the end of it from Amnesty International and every other human rights group on the planet. Miss Maxwell's family has filed a complaint with the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. For whatever's that worth, you may have seen her brother Ian on GBNews a couple of hours ago. One American incarceration expert, dismissing her dissatisfactions, says she should look on jail as, quote, a chance to grow. That's fine and dandy, except she hasn't been convicted of anything, so the growth process has been a bit premature. A bit of pub trivia for you. Who's the prosecutor in the Ghislaine Maxwell case? Why, it's Maureen Comey, who's the daughter of James Comey, the former FBI director, who took it upon himself to absolve Hillary Clinton of all crimes relating to her emails and to launch the now discredited Russia investigation, which did a very good job of crippling the incoming Trump administration. So it's Comey's daughter who's prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein's mole. America apparently has an hereditary deep state. But this week's trial is merely emblematic of broader problems. There are many admirable things about the United States of America, but its federal justice system is not one of them. My old boss and one of the victims of US justice, Conrad Black, who was on GBNews with me a fortnight or so back, Conrad likes to point out that the US Department of Justice wins 97% of its cases without a trial. If it goes to trial, there's a 99% conviction rate. If you did that in China or North Korea or Afghanistan, Chairman Xi and Kim Jong-un and the big beards of the Taliban would be going, whoa, are you nuts? Are you guys trying to make us look ridiculous? Let's dial back the conviction rate to 94.2% or 93.7%, something that's semi-credible. But with the US Department of Justice, to be accused is to be convicted. Ask the January 6th protesters who, after a year in solitary, with no trial date in sight, have been prevailed upon to plead guilty to various offences. For years, my advice to anyone who attracts the attention of the US Department of Justice has been to clean out your bank account, grab a cheap rental car, head for a remote Canadian border crossing, and prepare to spend your remaining years in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. Right now, another subject to the Crown from Australia is facing the grim and life-shortening possibility of joining Ghislaine Maxwell in the federal penitentiary. The US money no object big security state has spent the last 2.5 years seeking to extradite Julian Assange, officially for publishing the so-called WikiLeaks documents from America's so-called most secure intelligence agencies, but unofficially they're pursuing him for making them look like a bunch of chumps. He's being charged under the US Espionage Act. He's not an American. He owes the American state no allegiance. He's an Australian, and his allegiance lies elsewhere. Americans would be furious if some American were to be extradited to Australia for publishing Australia's secrets. In the dysfunctional toilet of American intelligence, more than 4 million people have a top security clearance. That's equivalent to the entire population of New Zealand. So it's no big surprise that their secrets keep walking out the door. And in fact, the same worthless Department of Justice trying to extradite Mr. Assange for leaking its secrets leaks its own secrets all the time. The FBI just last week leaked confidential attorney-client communications of a guy whose pad they'd raided to the New York Times, and the Times was happy to publish them. The aforementioned Mr. Comey was happy to leak details of that fake Trump dossier, the one about the incontinent hookers in hotel rooms. Comey was happy to leak that to the press himself. Should British judges even be entertaining the question of extradition to the corrupt US justice system? Shoot me an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Gabriel Shipton is the brother of Julian Assange, and we are very pleased to have him with us. How is your brother actually holding up these days, Gabriel? Because basically he's now been in Belmarsh, which is no fun, for something, I think it's something like a year and a half now. How's he holding up?
Well, hi, Mark. I mean, we're coming up on Julian's third Christmas in Belmarsh prison. So this will be the third Christmas that he's spent inside Belmarsh prison, which, you know, as you know, is UK's hardest prison, has the most dangerous criminals housed there. He's, you know, as you probably expect. I mean, Julian is very strong. He's a very principled man, but you know, all these attacks and these attacks on his liberty are really grinding him down. So yeah, he's in there and he's still going. He's still fighting, but you know, the conditions are very, very oppressive.
Let me just give an example of what it might appear to be double standards by the United States government here. A Spanish court can't get the CIA to cooperate on a legal matter involving a Spanish outfit's eavesdropping on your brother while he was at the Ecuadorian embassy. Apparently, the CIA hired some Spaniards to go into the embassy and put all kinds of bugs in so they'd get to know everything that Julian was saying and doing. The Spanish magistrate has asked the CIA for information related to that, and the CIA are just stonewalling them. So somehow the English court is expected to cooperate with the United States government in the Assange case, when the United States government will not itself cooperate with foreign judges when it suits them not to do so.
Yeah, that's right. This alone, these spying revelations of basically the CIA operating a black site in the centre of London would be enough alone to have the case thrown out. But what's happening now, what we're seeing more and more of, is the US DOJ. It's reaching its arm into the UK now. So US laws have been applied to people who live in the UK. So you've got Julian Assange, who is a publisher, imprisoned. Business.
Yeah.
Extradition at the behest of the US DOJ. You've got this extradition treaty that was rushed through in the way of 9/11 has now been abused by the US DOJ to sort of grab whoever they want out of the UK at the cost of the US taxpayer. The UK taxpayer. The UK taxpayer is actually paying the US lawyers in Julian's case. So there's this
that's outrageous.
It's totally lopsided extradition treaty. And when the UK wants to extradite someone, say, in relation to the death of Harry Dunn and Secoulis, an American, the Americans refuse. So there's this totally lopsided treaty that has been exploited by the US DOJ, which you so kindly described earlier.
Yeah, well, I regard them as a completely corrupt institution. In this case, and as I said, those statistics about the odds you're up against when you're in a federal courthouse in the United States, are you basically concerned that if the judge goes along with this and your brother winds up on a plane from Heathrow to Washington, that's a one-way ticket and he's not going to be coming back?
Yeah, well, that's why, Julian's extradition was rejected on January 4th. He won his case. The magistrate found that be a sentence for Julian. And she even cited Epstein's case, how he was, Epstein was allowed to commit suicide in prison. So that's
a polite way of putting it, yeah.
That's what we're afraid of.
And there've been other cases too where they have failed to protect prisoners in their custody. This is, as you say, a lot of this super favourable extradition arrangements came up in the wake of 9/11 and the idea of them was that if there was some terrorist guy on the other side of the planet, you'd be able to extradite him and put him in an American prison. But it actually seems to be being used for all kinds of other purposes. Do you actually think that any British or Commonwealth judge or anybody in the EU should be extraditing to this dirty, stinking, rotten, corrupt pseudo-justice system?
No, not at all. I think what British lawmakers need to really review this extradition treaty and make it more balanced and fair, because the US DOJ can, or any accusations that it makes can't be analysed in a British court. So it can make the most outlandish allegations and request an extradition, and those allegations cannot be argued in the courts in Britain or wherever these extradition treaties exist. So I think they need to be reviewed and updated, so that these sorts of things don't keep happening to UK citizens or Europeans.
Let me just ask you one final question on this, Gabriel. Are you disappointed by the lack of support your brother has received, particularly from the American media? The American media give themselves Pulitzer Prizes for publishing materials leaked from the United States government. But in this case, they seem to be sitting by silently and seem to be prepared to set an awful precedent in law in which a non-American publisher can go to jail for the rest of his life for being the recipient of leaked materials that he chooses to publish.
Yeah, I mean, look, they can always do more. The American media are very powerful, and it's really their rights that are at stake here. You know, their freedom of speech, their First Amendment rights. So they need to really speak up for Julian. Otherwise, you know, their rights will be taken away as well. So that's what we sort of spend a lot of time doing is trying to convince the media to stand up for their own rights, which seems you know, a funny situation, but that's what we have to do.
Well, that's very well said there, Gabriel. My own view is that this case is a complete crock. Your brother, whatever one feels about WikiLeaks, your brother has basically lost the last decade of his life while the United States tries to get him for their own stupidity and incompetence. And I hope this comes to an end the right way very, very soon. So we shall pay close attention to this case and we shall stay on it. Gabriel, thank you very much for joining us from Australia. Julian Assange is a citizen of Australia. And as I said, he knows no allegiance to the United States government. Coming up, your reactions to our top stories, plus from the ashes of Notre Dame arises a shallow, hollow husk of a cathedral for a post-Christian France. Is that the plan? And Elizabeth Moutet joins me from Paris. All that straight ahead on Farage.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
On Brazier at 8, Piers Corbyn takes to the tube to liken wearing a face mask to breaking wind. I'll be asking if the government's new COVID policy passes the smell test. Also, flight suits for pregnant combat pilots and transgender admirals mocked in America, but now the RAF is woker than thou. And why this episode of The Simpsons, which mocked the Chinese Communist Party, has been purged from TV screens in Hong Kong. That's Brazier from 8.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation, This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage. Let's hear what you have to say. Philip says, on the question of whether anyone in Britain or the Commonwealth or the EU should be extradited to America. Philip says, simple answer, no. I have tasted American justice. The district attorney said in America, it's not win justice, it's just win. And at the federal level, they do that on a completely incredible and unconvincing, and indeed what ought to be a totally embarrassing scale. Rax says, Ghislaine Maxwell is never going to have a fair trial. Atrocious. Thank you for covering this and highlighting the many, many issues with the American, quote, justice, unquote, system. Another viewer says, Mark Stein, that would be me, sums up the American justice system in 5 minutes, corrupt to the core. I should say full disclosure. I've been in a civil trial in the District of Columbia, just a civil case, for 10 years now. The District of Columbia in particular is where justice goes to die. Lily says it's a disgrace. They are a corrupt institution. And William via GB Views says, congrats to Mark for airing this injustice. No other media will give it the light of day. You know, the test of these things is when they're defendants that you don't like. I think Prince Andrew is a complete nitwit. I thought he was completely idiotic to give that interview where he was going on about pizza restaurants in Woking and the mysterious non-sweating disease he picked up while in the Falkland Islands. But the idea that he should submit himself to FBI interrogation when they show no sign at all of calling in Bill Clinton, who was a frequent flyer with God knows how many premium air miles on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, is completely ridiculous. Are you cowering before the mighty Omicron variant? When I was here on Friday, Omicron was only in Belgium. Now he's here in the UK as easily as if he were a Syrian refugee pretending to be an Afghan refugee. Here's Health Secretary Sajid Javid speaking earlier in the House of Commons.
First, measures at the border to slow the incursion of the variant from abroad. On Saturday, in line with the updated advice from the UK Health Security Agency, we acted quickly to add 4 other countries to the travel red list: Angola, Mozambique, Malawi and Zambia. This means that anyone who's not a UK or Irish national or resident who's been in any of these countries over the previous 10 days will be refused entry. And those who are allowed entry must isolate in a government-approved facility for 10 days. Beyond this red list, we're also going further to put in place a proportionate testing regime for arrivals from across the world. So we'll require anyone who enters the UK to take a PCR test by the end of their 2nd day after they arrive, and to self-isolate until they receive a negative result.
That's Sajid Javid in the House of Commons. Pay no attention to it, because if you just take a dinghy and land at Folkestone or Dungeness, none of that applies. Dr. David Steyn of the University of Exeter joins us now. What do you make of this reaction to the new variant? We're heading for the third year of COVID land, and yet we're still trying the same moves we were trying in March 2020. What do you make of this?
It's an interesting take that he's had on this. So the Omicron variant obviously arrived in Botswana, through South Africa, and it's already pretty much widespread across the whole of Europe. And we're taking these rather extreme steps without having a full handle on what is different about the Omicron variant in the way it presents. We know that it's got a tremendously different genome. So whereas the Delta variant had 6 mutations on it that allowed it to spread and caused a very slight increase in disease, this has got 32 mutations on that spike protein. So that is clearly allowing it to spread. There's no doubt about that. However, if you speak to any of the South African doctors, they are reporting that the disease associated with this is actually a more mild disease than we saw from the original COVID. And actually, indeed, that's the natural history of most viruses. It's not in a virus's best interest to kill its host. It wants the host to survive and spread it widely. So it's very interesting that they take such dramatic steps here when previously they've had such a softly approach.
Well, what is interesting, as you said, is that the doctors dealing with this in South Africa report that the effects are mild, that you feel heavy-limbed and tired for a couple of days, which is actually the reaction that a lot of people get to the vaccine. So in other words, it doesn't seem to be doing anything more dangerous to them than what a vaccine does. You're a specialist. You've dealt with people, particularly in the realm of diabetes, which is a terrible underlying condition to have if you happen to get the COVID, and with people who've had strokes and have other underlying conditions. Do you think we might have been better, instead of doing yet again this universal one-size-fits-all thing, actually trying to protect those most at risk and allowing normal everyday life to continue for everybody else?
Yeah, so when we first introduced the vaccine program, we chose the most at risk, those with diabetes, those with heart disease, the elderly, the vulnerable, to get the vaccine and get the boosters and going forward. Now we appear to have a one-size-fits-all, and we are seeing a tremendous disparity in people's response to the vaccine. So, for example, I'm still seeing people that are double vaccinated or even triple vaccinated are coming in with a minimal immune response. We're also seeing other people in their 20s and 30s that have got a tremendous immune response. And maybe the time's right now to start testing people to find out, have you responded? Do you have those antibodies? And offering additional vaccines to those who don't have the antibodies, whilst those who've still got a really good antibody response, leaving them as they are. It's time to start working on an individualized approach and giving those most at risk the extra, and leaving the rest who've got a good response to get on with their lives.
That makes too much sense, Dr. Steyn. The world's prime ministers and presidents seem to find it easier just to shut down airports and all the rest of it and introduce lockdown 7.3 or whatever we're up to by now. Thank you very much, Dr. Steyn. Time for our What the Farage story today. At the start of Holy Week 2.5 years ago, the spire of the Cathedral of Notre de Paris burned and toppled, somewhat curiously, you might think. Even as the fire still raged, the authorities pronounced it an accident, notwithstanding a spate of church attacks throughout France in the months beforehand. God's Kingdom of Heaven is not formally a wholly owned subsidiary of the French state, But God's churches since 1905 have been the property of the government. So whatever arises in the ashes of the old cathedral is ultimately the choice of Monsieur Macron and his pals. They can't really do much to the exterior because millions of people pass by every day, and however godless they might be, they like their heritage sites to look venerable and time-worn. The inside, however, is another matter, and the Daily Telegraph reports that plans for the interior include replacing confessional boxes, altars and classical sculptures with modern art murals and state-of-the-art sound and light effects to create, quote, emotional spaces for visitors. There will be a discovery trail with an emphasis on Africa and Asia, except for the last stage of the trail, which will focus on climate change. Don't worry, there'll still be just an teensy little bit of religion in there. Bible quotations will be projected onto chapel walls in various languages. No Latin, but there will be Mandarin Chinese. So Chairman Xi will feel right at home when he takes over. The doyenne of French correspondents, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, joins us from Paris now. Anne-Elisabeth, this seems almost too obvious a set of cliches to believe. Can it really be true that the finest minds in Paris are preparing to do this to the Cathedral of Notre Dame?
Well, they are projecting to do this to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and I have even sort of more extraordinary news for you, because this is the idea of some bright minds at the Archbishopry of Paris who believe that the only way to make people interested in Catholicism is to dumbing it down, so to speak, and it's Monseigneur Aupetit, the Archbishop of Paris, who's apparently at the head of a team who decided that this would be a good thing. In other words, instead of what has been the traces and the art and the experience of 800 years of Catholicism at Notre Dame de Paris is not easy enough for people who visit to experience, and they've got to get explanations, and essentially it's Catholicism for, it's for everyone. It's very strange, and it's getting a bit of pushback, and on the 9th of December, there's a meeting of the Commission Nationale du Patrimoine, which is the National Heritage Commission in Paris, because the city of Paris and the state has got a voice on this, and they're beginning to get pushback, especially on Twitter, about this, saying this is one more example of the ongoing sort of destruction of what used to be the symbols of eternal France, if you will.
How much faith is left in France? In the south of the country, you have the most beautiful medieval churches, and I notice every time I'm there, a few years back, they used to hold a mass in that beautiful medieval church once every 3 weeks. Then it becomes once every 5 weeks. Then it becomes once every 7 weeks, and they're sharing a priest with more and more parishes. But if you can't, and I understand in a small village that can be difficult in a land that's losing its faith. But when you think about a great cathedral in the center of national life, if as you say, the men who run the church don't understand the profundity of their own faith, why would they expect anybody else to go along with it?
I'm entirely with you. It is very true that, first of all, there aren't that many priests. I mean, there are vocations, and you have new priests, and you have new seminaries, and there are some organizations that actually are revivifying the seminaries in provincial France. But still, it is true that you've got priests who have several churches to take care of, if only because people are also leaving those villages. It's not just that they're leaving the churches, it's that young people go and find work where there is work. So that's part of the general problem. But if you go to Notre Dame on a Sunday morning, there will be Mass, and the Mass is well attended. And if you go to other churches in Paris, there is Mass, and the Mass is well attended. And it's already, I mean, it's the Mass post-Vatican II, essentially because there's a sort of political battle that since Vatican II has been fought between traditionalist Catholics and those who believe that modernizing things is going to bring more people in the churches. I'm not going to take sides here, But I do notice that in traditionalist churches, you actually find more people regularly at Mass than in the others. But all the same, especially with the splendor of a place like Notre, with the statues and the stained glass and the paintings and everything that has been added over the centuries to make this church what it is, including the 19th century restoration that, instant experts during the fire started telling us was a bad restoration. It was a wonderful restoration, and all of this was motivated by faith.
Yep, absolutely. And you're quite right there, Anne Elizabeth, and there is no market. As many of the fire-breathing mullahs could tell you, there is no market for a faith that has no faith in itself. Thank you very much for joining us. Joyeux Noël ou Joyeux Avant, if I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And we're glad to have Anne Elizabeth speaking to us from Paris. Next, it's Talking Pints with the Peter Pan of Pop, Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
No Farage to Barrage tonight, but you can stump the Steyn. Give it your best shot. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Talking Pints is being conducted virtually, so we're not in the Rose and Crown. We're in the snug of the old Fox and Zoom call. Nevertheless, it's a delight to welcome to GB News a prodigious hitmaker. Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits, as his Something Is Happening. I'm into something good. I'm Henry the Eighth I Am. If Peter is ever in your neck of the woods, don't miss him because he's hilarious on stage. If you don't like the songs, it's not a problem because you can take out all the music and what's left is a brilliant comedy act. Anyway, I have my pint, so let's see what Peter Noon is drinking for his tipple out in California. Are you there, Peter?
Oh, I'm here. How you doing? I got
to drink.
I got a pint of milk.
Oh my word! Oh my, that's. I think that's what the British Milk Marketing Board used to call a pinter. What you prefer milk as your tipple round this time of day, do you?
Well, you know,
Yeah, carry on, Peter. I should say, by the way, Peter, Peter, you'll know this because you know a lot of pop music. There was a group who had a song hit in the 1960s about leaving a note for the milkman because the guy's love had gone away, so he didn't need any milk today. I can't remember for the life of me who sang it. Do you know who sang it?
It was this great group, my favourite group, called Urban and the Hermits. And it was No Milk Today, my love.
Yeah, do the next couple of lines as well.
Brilliant.
Peter.
It did. It was a number one.
It was that couplet. The bottle stands forlorn, a symbol of the dawn. And that was written by Graham Gouldman, a great songwriter, and it's one of the greatest couplets in the history of British songwriting. Now, you were barely out of short trousers when you had that hit. Did you actually know the meaning of the word forlorn? Oh. Oh, we've lost Peter Noon. That is a. I tell you what. Here's a clip of Peter Noon. If you saw him with the bottle of milk there, here he is at the time of No Milk Today, my love has gone away, the bottle stands forlorn, a symbol of the dawn. Here's a picture of Peter in a milk factory in the Netherlands. Let's see if we can put this up. Yeah, there he is. That's somewhere in the Low Countries. And to celebrate, I think he was getting a gold record from the Netherlands music business for selling however many copies it is of No Milk Today. That's a great song, Peter. You have one of the best attitudes, I would say, towards pop stardom, because when you go on stage, you're having a grand old time, you're having fun, and you're not taking it too seriously. So you're not like all there's guys who got to number 27 in 1958 and they don't understand why it never happened again, and they're all kind of consumed with bitterness about it. But you just have a grand old time and roll with it.
I do, and you've been...
I think we maybe have... I think we've lost Peter for good there. We're going to try and set him up and maybe send the limo to some state of the art thing. The old Fox and Zoom call doesn't seem to be working there. I tell you what, though, I love Peter's great song. This was a fabulous song, big hit in the late 60s, and then the 70s. I think it was the Carpenters did a version of it that has absolutely nothing compared to this. But this is one of my favourite of Peter's big hits, and here he is with me a couple of years ago. So let's just have. That's a fabulous song, and I never tire of hearing that. Peter is back with us, and I hope this works this time. You've got a terrific, relaxed. I've never seen anyone like this. When I've toured around different parts of the world, America and Australia and places, you often arrive the night before greatest hits of the 50s or some rock act from the 70s, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not good, but you just kind of roll on and enjoy it, and you wear the same clothes and you evoke the same happy spirit that you did when you had these hits first time round. How do you do that?
I kind of love the songs so much that I'm just happy to perform them as often as I can. Even Henry VIII.
Oh, I think we're having terrible difficulties with that. I do apologise for that. It's never fun when the old Skype or Zoom or whatever it is freezes after a few seconds. I should say, by the way, at this time of year, Peter is about the only guy I know who doesn't have a Christmas album. If I go through my LP collection, you've got the Bing Crosby Christmas album, you got the Mariah Carey Christmas album, you got the Priti Patel Christmas album, but I have never seen a Peter Noone Christmas album, and he does a beautiful version of Oh Holy Night, which has got more religious faith in it than anything they're planning for the new cathedral to Notre Dame. I must say, one thing we didn't get onto is his big hit, Something Is Happening. And it started happening when you walked by, and unfortunately, it is time to say bye to dear old Peter Noone. We will try and get him back on a better connection. Instead, we shall do a slightly early version of Time to Barrage the Farage. Time for the Stein No Barrage the Farage. This one says, Mark, did you know that Omicron is an anagram for moronic? Yeah, they're not even trying now, are they? The next one will be an anagram of if you fall for this, you'll fall for anything. Obviously, the big story with these, because they're running out of letters of the Greek alphabet, and they passed over new, N-U, because they said if you started referring to the new variant, people would think it was the new NEW variant. So that's why they didn't want to call it the new variant. Otherwise, you'd have the makings of some Abbott and Costello Who's on First type comedy sketch. And then the next letter was Xi, as X-I, Xi, as in Chairman Xi, of the Chinese Communist Party, and they didn't want to call it that because they said it was a common name and people called Xi might be embarrassed if they thought it was a Xi variant. In fact, everything since this thing came out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, whatever it was, 2 years ago, has been a Chairman Xi variant. So they're all Xi variants. So we've now moved on to Omicron, and they tell us that when we're getting beyond Omicron, when we've run out of Greek letters, they're going to use the name of constellations. So we will be literally onto the Andromeda strain. That's how it goes in COVID land without end. John says, is the power of the US declining? Oh, don't believe that for a moment. Don't believe that. Just because they take 20 years to lose to goat herds with fertilizer in Afghanistan, just because they can't even take out the stuff, all the bazillions of dollars they've spent on hardware they can't take out, so they turn the Taliban into the 8th, 9th most powerful army on the face of the earth, just because they owe $30 trillion in federal government debt, which is more money than anybody has owed to anybody ever, and is certainly more money than anybody has ever owed to anybody ever. There's never been anybody in human history who has had to pay $30 trillion back just to get back to the stage of being totally broke and having nothing. Just because the aforementioned Chairman Xi is apparently being gifted with Entebbe International Airport in Uganda because Uganda has defaulted on its debt to China. By the way, if you're planning a trip to the United States, don't worry. When America defaults on its debt, the Chinese aren't going to want to dump like JFK or LAX or any of those American airports. So you're reasonably safe. Of course, the power of the US is declining. Basically, the United States decided to outsource its entire manufacturing to a communist dictatorship. So they enabled Chairman Xi to come up with the only economically viable form of communism. That was the great defect. As the chaps in 1917 could tell you, they're very good at the totalitarian dictatorship side of communism, but they weren't so flush at keeping the communist regime in sufficient liquidity. The American Chamber of Commerce basically took care of that, turned everything in America is made in China, and so the power of the US is certainly declining, and if China isn't the world's leading economic power already, it will be in the next year or two. By the way, the Chinese look on this. They don't differentiate between the English and the British Empire and the Americans. Or the Europeans, or the French and the Spaniards and the Portuguese. They think there's been half a millennium of unnatural Euro-American global dominance, and the world is simply returning to its natural order with China as number one? That is a fascinating question. It's the big theme of our time, that America has surrendered global dominance, and in the fat-headed political conversation that goes on in the United States between the radical left and the pom-pom girls on the American right waving their constitutions about, they're not even talking about. I said to President Trump that he should have made his campaign slogan, I suggested to the Trump campaign that it should be "Make America Number One" again, and nobody took me up on it. Mark asks, if the Democrats win the next election, could there be a civil war? There's going to be civil war everywhere. Claremont Review of Books, I just saw, I meant to mention this to Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, says France on the verge of civil war. There's predictions of civil war everywhere. I don't know whether there'll be a civil war. I said rather flippantly that I used to worry that there would be, I used to worry in America that there would be a civil war, and now I'm worried that there won't be. But I don't know whether there will be a civil war. That's a grim question. How many boat people, asks one viewer, are isolated, tested and vaccinated on watery landing in the UK? Answer is a big fat zero. And finally, Peter says, why can't they just restore the wonderful masterpiece of Notre Dame? Because that would be too obvious. And these people want to make their own mark on that glorious site. That is going to do it for tonight. Colin Brazier is in the house, the indispensable man. He is here and he is ready to roll after the all-important weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Pretty chilly out there today, but tomorrow temperatures will be quite a bit higher. However, it is going to be a fairly grey Tuesday, and there'll be rain and drizzle in places as well. But it has turned milder across the northwest already thanks to this warm front tucked in here, some warmer air that is slowly spreading its way southwards. Before it arrives though, with clearer skies, we could see a touch of frost across the southeast until temperatures rise through the night as the cloud moves in, making for a misty, murky kind of night. And at times it'll be quite windy, particularly in the far northeast, although the wind's easing here a little as we head towards dawn. Temperatures, as I say, on the rise. So although close to freezing in some spots this evening, by morning we're up at 8, 9, 10 Celsius. So it's a much milder start, but it's a pretty grey day. Rain and drizzle on and off across Scotland throughout tomorrow, and for much of Northern Ireland, northwest England. Some patchy rain at times across eastern England, but much of the south, I suspect, will be dry but fairly drab. Temperatures will be quite a bit higher than today's values. Still fairly chilly across Shetland, but elsewhere double figures, maybe 13 Celsius. But more wet weather will pep up through the afternoon and evening for Northern Ireland and then across Scotland. Quite a wet evening. A band of rain will swing across England and Wales. That could be quite lively for a time as well as the winds start to pick up once more, so turning blustery and also colder for Wednesday. We should see a return of some sunshine, but there will be showers across all areas, those showers turning wintry across northern Scotland, so some snow here, mostly over hills, but some to lower levels later in the day, and the winds picking up once more. Temperatures on Wednesday back down to single figures, and add on that wind, it will feel a lot colder. So things fluctuating quite a bit this week. Thursday looks like being a cold day, but with some sunshine before the potential for more wetter weather comes in during Friday and Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, has the UK overreacted to Omicron? We'll look at the evidence and debate with Oxford expert Carl Hennigan in The Clash before getting positive Professor Carol Sikora's verdict. Then GB News star Neil Oliver advises how to deal with new restrictions without losing your mind. Plus, campaigner Liz Cole on the return of COVID paranoia in schools, and I'll break down the top headlines with my superstar panel. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier.
News alive! It's like trying to keep a fart in your trousers. What?
Local eccentric Piers Corbyn takes to the tube, there to liken wearing a face mask to breaking wind. I'll be asking if the government's new COVID policy passes the smell test with a leading epidemiologist. Also, last week we told you how flight suits for pregnant combat pilots and transgender admirals were being mocked in America. I'll be joined by a former British Army colonel who despairs that our military is now on woke manoeuvres.
Oh, look at him sleeping. He's like a little angel that killed 50 million people.
Also, why is the Chinese Communist Party running scared of The Simpsons? One of Britain's leading satirists, Brendan O'Neill, will explain why Beijing hates Homer. And Prince Charles stands in for the Queen as Barbados abolishes its monarchy. In other words, our monarchy. The doyenne of royal writers, Angela Levin, joins me to discuss that and the latest allegations from a controversial documentary about Harry and William. All that plus tonight's Brazier Angle and our poll testing just how bolshy you are feeling about being told to wear a mask again. That's coming up after the news headlines with Simon.
Thank you very much, Colin. Yes, I'm Simon Pusey. These are your latest news headlines. COVID booster vaccinations are to be offered to all over 18s to help tackle the spread of the Omicron variant. The JCVI has also recommended that the time between a second and third dose be halved to 3 months, and for 12 to 15-year-olds to be offered second jabs. The new advice follows early evidence which suggests that high antibody levels may provide better protection against Omicron. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary has announced 2 additional cases of the new variant of coronavirus in England, taking the UK total to 11. The World Health Organization has also described its risk as very high based on early evidence. Sajid Javid confirmed the mandatory wearing of face coverings in shops and on public transport from 4 a.m. tomorrow. Those returning from abroad will also have to self-isolate until a negative PCR test has been issued.
We're learning more about this new variant all the time. But the latest indication is that it spreads very rapidly. It may impact the effectiveness of one of our major treatments for COVID-19, Ronapreve. And, as the Chief Medical Officer said this weekend, there's a reasonable chance that our current vaccines may be impacted.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has reshuffled parts of his front bench. Shadow Culture Secretary Jo Stephens will replace Neil Griffith as the Shadow Welsh Secretary, while Cat Smith has said she's resigning as Shadow Secretary for Young People and returning to the backbenches. She also tweeted a letter warning of the damage caused by the failure to readmit former leader Jeremy Corbyn to the party. A teenager has been remanded in custody after appearing in court charged with the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Liverpool. Ava White was stabbed in the city centre last Thursday and died from what police described as catastrophic injuries. The 14-year-old boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was also charged with being in possession of a blade. The jury has been chosen in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell in New York. The British socialite has been accused of recruiting teenagers for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse for 10 years from 1994. She's been in a US jail since her arrest in July last year and denies any wrongdoing. Over 100,000 homes are still without power after Storm Arwen battered the UK. The Energy Networks Association said about 155,000 properties were still suffering from power cuts this afternoon. They said the destruction of electricity lines was the worst seen in Britain since 2005. Well, that's just about it from me for now. Let's go back to Brazer.
Well, consider, if you will, the case of two old comrades. Both have spent years on the hard left. Both believe in things the rest of us find doolally. Neither should be taken seriously. And yet, while one is ignored and has to resort to ever more bizarre stunts to get his voice heard, the other is feted. Her opinions broadcast to millions at moments of national crisis. She's treated like the Oracle of Delphi. He's treated like the village idiot. He is Piers Corbyn, the man who pulls off the seemingly impossible task of making his brother Jeremy look middle of the road. Here's Piers Corbyn last night, part of an anti-lockdown flash mob on the London Underground.
It's like trying to keep a fart in your trousers.
If you're struggling to catch the lyrics, I can help you with that. Wearing a mask is like trying to keep fart, there's the word, in your trousers. As catchy protest songs go, it's not exactly Bob Dylan or Jodi Mitchell, but however bonkers, it's no dottier than what we heard from another old lefty this weekend. This is Susan Mickey, as in Take There. Whereas Corbyn seemed less committed to the Marxist cause, she has been for the past 43 years an active member of the Communist Party of Britain. On Saturday evening, Professor Mickey was the first expert invited by the BBC to pass instant judgment on the Prime Minister's televised announcement about COVID. Why was she the wrong person to ask? Well, for one thing, she sits on SAGE, not as a scientist, but as a psychologist. What people wanted to hear at the weekend was whether the new variant warrants a return to the old lockdown. Is it deadly? How deadly? Today, several scientists say that though it will take a fortnight for clarity to emerge, it may be that the Omicron variant is weak, part of COVID's virological evolution into a less serious disease like the cold. But Mickey belongs to a school of thought that says any risk posed by COVID is too great. She's spoken at events organised by the Zero COVID campaign, which might more accurately be called the Furlough Forever campaign. You'd think as a communist sympathiser she might think twice before speaking approvingly of communist China's COVID record, but clearly, having secured her seat on the SAGE committee, she won't be deterred. Last year, for instance, she posted this extraordinary tweet, laying bare where her sympathies lie. China, she said, has a socialist collective system, not an individualistic, consumer-oriented, profit-driven society badly damaged by 20 years of failed neoliberal economic policies. What history-defying drivel. She rounded off with the words #learn lessons. Well, of course, the China she praised has learned lessons, hasn't it? After murdering millions of its own people, it's learned that it's better they don't do anything disruptive, like vote or be allowed to ridicule the Communist Party. Even today, there are reports of how thin-skinned party apparatchiks remain. If you live in Chinese-controlled Hong Kong, for instance, you will no longer be able to see this episode of The Simpsons. It's the one where the Simpsons visit Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the site of the deadly 1989 crackdown against democracy campaigners. In the show, a sign can be seen which reads, "On this site in 1989, nothing happened." Well, if you were hoping to see that in Hong Kong, forget it. The episode has been purged. People who speak highly of the regime in Beijing should not be invited to sit in judgment after our democratically chosen Prime Minister announces a major change in COVID policy. Imagine the outcry if, when the PM finished telling the nation that they were facing lockdown again, of sorts, the face of Piers Corbyn had filled millions of TV screens. It's unthinkable. So what were the BBC thinking, asking another old, loony left-winger to pontificate at a moment of national crisis? That's tonight's Brazier Angle. Well, Groundhog Day then for COVID in Britain. For tourists, the red list is back. For shops and public transport, masks are meant to be back. For some office workers, it's back to working from home. For test and trace workers, it's back to business. So what are we looking at? One German scientist today wondered if the new Omicron variant was a blessing, potentially in disguise, evidence that the virus was mutating but growing weaker as it does so. Let's introduce you to Dr. Raghib Ali, who's an epidemiologist at Cambridge University, but also a frontline doctor as well. Doctor, thanks so much for your time this evening. How long do you think we'll have to wait till we get a clearer picture of how transmissible and lethal this new variant is?
Good evening, Colin. The first point, in terms of the transmissibility of the virus, we have some early indications from South Africa that it is highly transmissible and is probably more transmissible than the existing variants. But that doesn't mean that it's more severe, and the early indications have been reassuring. But to be honest, it's too early to know. So it will take another couple of weeks to know whether these cases are leading to hospitalizations and death. And obviously that's the key outcome of interest for us as doctors, to make sure it's not progressing to severe disease. So we will have a much better idea in 2 to 3 weeks.
You're not setting, I totally get why this would be, you're not setting too much store by some anecdotal evidence coming out of South Africa from doctors there saying this seems to be afflicting the young, but the young only mildly.
So South Africa is a much younger country than here and the rest of Europe. So the majority of people who would have got the virus would be young anyway, because 80% of people are aged less than 40, from what I know. And so and even in the UK, generally the disease is mild in the young and has been throughout. So it's not, as I said, it's too early to know what the impact will be when it gets into older age groups, and particularly those who are both older and have other diseases, comorbidities. So, of course, we'd all like to know, what's going to happen, but it is too early. Of course, we hope that what's been described will continue to be the case in older age groups, and particularly given the context in the UK, that people who have been vaccinated or who have had previous infection, that will protect them against this new variant and not cause severe disease.
It's right, of course, that where we have to, we prepare for the worst, but we can hope, can't we? And it was interesting to listen to the words. And you could see why people would want to listen to the words of a German clinician who said today or yesterday that actually we may be looking at something here that's kind of a blessing in disguise. We may be looking at a variant of the virus which actually is potentially weaker and as such will be part of that evolutionary process that sees the virus weakening over time, becoming more like the cold.
Of course, we'd all like to see that. And I think there has been something of an overreaction, particularly on the first day this was announced. I think people were panicking and exaggerating the risk. I mean, the point I would really make to all your viewers is that there's no plausible scenario by which we're back in where we were in March 2020 or April 2020. All the leading virologists and vaccine scientists are clear that the existing vaccine that we have, will provide some protection against this new variant as well. So even if it doesn't turn out to be weaker, even if it turns out to be similar or cause more severe disease, we have we're in a very good position in the UK because of our very high levels of immunity here. The other thing we heard today, as you may know, from the JCVI, from the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation, is that the booster dose provides that additional protection. And they've brought forward the gap. So now everybody, pretty much all adults, will be able to get the booster dose before hopefully this new variant takes hold anyway. So I think we shouldn't be panicking. We shouldn't be worried. We should be in fact, I think cautiously optimistic. But it is really, up to us to take those steps, particularly to take the booster. I mean, it's shown that it reduces infection by about 90% and hospitalization deaths by about 80%.
To your colleagues in pharmaceutical research, would you be encouraging them to look at tweaking the vaccine to take account of this particular variant? Because when we tried to do that with I think it was the Kent variant, wasn't it, which looked potentially quite threatening, it turned out not to be. But actually, we tweaked a vaccine to deal with it. But actually, that became rather pointless. You're trying to hit a moving target, aren't you?
So it's true. We did tweak the vaccine, or the people working on it did tweak it for the Delta variant, actually, because there was concern that might have some immune escape. But as it happened, the vaccines were very effective against Delta. The work has already started. From Friday, the work has already started on developing a new version of the vaccine, if necessary. But the minimum time, to get that vaccine into people's arms would be January at the earliest, and probably slightly longer. So we have, it's not worth waiting for that. It's better to take what we have now, particularly those who are at high risk. There's still 6 million people in the UK over the age of 50 who are the group that really end up in hospital and die from this, who haven't taken the booster dose yet. So I'd really encourage all of those in that group to take. I've taken it myself, of course, as a frontline doctor, and I encourage everyone to take it as well.
As a frontline doctor, you may be perhaps a little chary of taking a view on this. You may feel it's too political, but I wonder if you feel, as some do, that there is an incoherence in a policy that says wear masks in shops, but don't worry about it in pubs.
I think the whole mask debate has become unnecessarily polarised in some ways, and something of a distraction. So, of course, I wear a mask, not just in the hospital. I wear it on the tube. I wear it in shops. I wear it if I'm meeting anyone at high risk. But I also acknowledge that it makes a limited difference to the overall transmission. I mean, I was saying that the booster reduces infection risk by about 90%. Masks, the best evidence we have suggests it probably reduces by about 10%. So it's not nothing. There's a marginal benefit there. Personally, I think the approach should always be to try to encourage people to wear a mask, to convince them of the benefits of wearing a mask, rather than forcing them to. But I also understand that on public transport, when people don't really have a choice how they get to work, that it's reasonable to expect everyone to wear a mask in that particular situation.
Dr. Ali, really appreciate your time. Thanks for your expertise. Thanks a lot. What, if anything, then, will be the impact of the Omicron COVID variant on the classroom? Masks are being reintroduced in corridors in secondary schools. More troublingly, perhaps, the system of quarantine for anyone who comes into contact with someone who has the new variant may lead to thousands of healthy kids being forced to stay at home. Steve Baker, the MP, the Deputy Chairman of the COVID Recovery Group, says the new crackdown will lead to chaos in schools. Well, here's Christine Brett, who campaigns for the rights of children to have an education that's not blighted by the fear of coronavirus. Christine, thanks for your time this evening. Appreciate it. We don't yet know, do we, how schools and heads and the unions are going to react to this. What's your feeling?
Well, sadly, we do know that masks have been introduced from today, actually, with children back in communal areas and corridors in lots of schools. And we are hearing, sadly, from lots of parents for whom, children are now being isolated from school, even though they are apparently well. So, we're concerned, schools, I think, are in a very difficult position. I think this advice or this guidance was updated sort of overnight, and they were given no notice whatsoever. At the same time, the Secretary for State for Education was attending the teaching awards, the Pearson Teaching Awards last night, with hundreds of teachers from all parts of the country, none of whom were wearing masks. So I think there's a big discord in what the government are saying and what they are actually doing. And I think this is very difficult for children who've had a very, disrupted education for the last, 18 months or so. And to be back here again is quite frankly, quite depressing for children, because they are just at the stage now where they want to get excited about Christmas and all the festivities and arrangements, and actually their restrictions are back, and they're back harsher for children, in fact, than they are for adults.
And that part of that uncertainty, Christine. I've got one child doing GCSEs next summer, one doing A-levels, and I know they'll be thinking, are they going to be cancelled? Is all the work that we're doing going to count for nothing again? And there'll be younger kids as well. The kids, for instance, who've sat in lessons, some of them wearing masks, struggling to lip read or connect in the way they would ordinarily with a teacher. potentially facing disruption again. I mean, it just feels like here we go again, doesn't it?
It feels like Groundhog Day, doesn't it? And I think it's, I think we have to remember that the proportion of time that this has been in children's lives is much greater than adults. Yeah. And you're right, there's so much uncertainty. And what children need is stability, and they need to know where they are. And sadly, we're not able to give them that. And I think, for children going to school who want to socialise, who want to communicate with their friends, who want to ask questions, putting them in masks where we hear, from your previous guest that the actual benefit of masks is quite low. We also know now that the harms of wearing them are quite substantial, especially for children in terms of their development of communication and language skills. And actually schools are where they are to learn. They're in a consistent group at school. And I think they just,